Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well and welcome back to Lifey Technologies YouTube channel, and thank you so much for watching and supporting our content. So this is another episode of our Juniper Lab simulation series. Remember, in this series we discuss how to implement different networking protocols, different networking technologies on Juniper routing and switching devices. So if you haven't watched our previous episode, kindly check them out on our channel. So in this episode, we'll be focusing on how to configure basic OSPF functionalities on Juniper routing devices. So OSPF is a very common routing protocol. It's a dynamic routing protocol. It's a link state protocol. It's an IGP, which means it's an interior or internal gateway protocol. So it's deployed within an autonomous system, and it's commonly deployed on many service provider networks, both enterprise and carrier. So we need to understand how to configure OSPF on different platforms. We've discussed how to configure OSPF on Huawei routers. We've discussed how to configure OSPF and troubleshoot on Nokia routing devices. So if you are interested in learning how to configure OSPF on Nokia and also Huawei, you can also check on our channel and watch those videos. So when you are configuring OSPF, there are some few things that you need to do. The first thing is you need to configure the device interfaces. So once you've configured IP address on interfaces, sometimes you can give it a description and many other details. Maybe you need to configure MTU, maybe you need to create link aggregation groups. So once you've done that, now you can move to the next step of configuring the router identifiers for the devices in your OSPF. So you configure the router ID. So once you've configured the router ID, you can now go ahead and activate different OSPF areas on your devices. So these are the steps that we'll be following, and in this episode we'll just be using 3 commands. So you only need 3 commands to configure basic OSPF functionalities on Juniper routing devices. So you can see that this is our topology. We have 3 areas. We have the backbone area, which is area 0, and then we have area 1 and area 2. So area 0 has router 1 and router 2, and then area 1 has router 2 and router 3, and finally area 2 has router R1 and R4. So R1 and R2 are our area border routers because they are connecting the two different areas, area 0 to area 1 and also area 2 to area 0. So we'll be moving to this configuration stage, and as I've mentioned, we need to configure the interfaces, we need to configure the router identifiers, and then we need to go ahead and now activate different OSPF areas on different devices. So this is the topology setup on EVNG. I've just taken a snippet of this. We have the lab setup in EVNG, and I'm logged into the router. So let me go to the secure CRT. So I'm logged into the routers R1, R2, R3, and R4, and I've mentioned that we are only using 3 commands. The first command is to configure the interface. So we'll be configuring the interface with an IP address. Once we've configured the interface with an IP address, we'll configure the router ID. So it's always a best practice to configure the router ID manually instead of letting the router to select based on some parameters. So we'll be configuring the router ID manually, and then once you've configured the router ID, we will be configuring different areas starting from the backbone area, and then we configure the other areas, area 1 and area 2. So on router 1, you can see that router 1 has connection to area 0 and area 2. So the first thing that we need to do is to configure the interface. So we'll be configuring the 2 interfaces, but I want us to see the 3 commands. So for us to be able to see the 3 commands that we'll be configuring, we'll first configure OSPF between R1 and R2, and then we can configure the other OSPF areas. So on R1, we need to start by configuring the interface GE00. So the command is set interface. It's GE0/0/0. That is the physical interface. Remember, we always you have to configure units, the logical units on Juniper routing devices. So it's unit 0, and then family, we are using IPv4, so we use inet, and then we use the command address, and then we'll configure the IP address of 10.10.10.0 mask is 31. So that is our first command. Now our next command will be to configure the router ID for OSPF. So it will set routing options and then router ID, and this one will be 1.1. We'll be using the router ID as 1.1.1. That is the second command. And now the third command that we need to run is to enable OSPF in the backbone area. So I will set protocols OSPF, and then it's area 0, and I will go ahead and activate interface GE 0/0/0. So that is it. Those are the three commands that we'll be using to activate OSPF between devices. And remember, once you have configured the router ID on R1, when we are activating OSPF in area 2, we don't need to reconfigure the area ID because it's a global parameter. So we've used these three commands. First, you set the interfaces GE00, you configure an IP address, then you configure the router ID. Once you've configured the router ID, you configure OSPF and enable the specified area on the interface. So that is it. We can use the command show compare to see what we have so far. So you can see these are the configurations. So I will commit. I'll go to router 2 and do the same. So we said we are starting with the interface configuration, set interfaces G0/0/0, unit, it's unit 0, and then family inet, address, it's 10.10.10.1, mask is 31. Then we set the route ID, set routing options, then router ID. This one will be 2.2.2, and finally we can activate OSPF, set protocols OSPF area 0 interface G 0/0/0. We can run the show compare commands. So these are the candidate configuration, and then commit. So we go back to R1, we can exit. If I run show OSPF neighbor, you can see that we now have an OSPF neighbor adjacent that is up and the state is full. So you can see that the three commands have been able to activate OSPF on this router. And of course, these are just basic configuration. When you are doing a production network, there are other parameters that you need to configure to ensure that OSPF is operating optimally. So I can run the command show OSPF interface. You see we have interface G0/0/0 unit 0. You can also use the detail command to see many more other details about this OSPF adjacency. So that is it on R1 and R2. So for the backbone area configuration, we can now go ahead and configure the other areas. So on R2, we can configure let's start with R1, configure area 2. So I'll go back to the configuration mode, and then we need to configure interface GE001. So set interfaces GE, and then unit 0. Family, we are still using inet. And then address, it should be 10.10.10.4. Mask is 31. Then we activate OSPF, set protocols, OSPF. This is area 2, interface G0/0/1. Show pipe compare. So these are the configurations, just 2 lines because we have already configured the router ID. So we don't need to reconfigure the router ID. We just need to configure the interface and then configure the OSPF area 2. So once we've done this, we'll commit and quit. And then on R4 set interfaces /0/1 unit 0 family inet, and then address should be 10.10.10.5, mask is 31. Then set routing options so that we configure the router ID 4.4.4. Then we activate OSPF, set protocols OSPF. We have to area 2 interface 0/0/1. So these are the 3 commands that we need to configure, and then we will go ahead and show compare just to verify what we have in our candidate configurations. So we have the route ID, we have the IP address assigned, and then we have OSPF activated. And then I will commit and quit. So finally, let's configure area 1 on R2 and R3. So I will set interfaces. This is G001, unit 0, family inet, then address, it's 10.10.10.2, mask is 31. Then I will set protocols, OSPF, area 1, interface 0/0/1. So these are the 2 commands that we need. Show pipe compare to check our candidate configuration. Commit and quit. Then on R3 we have the 3 commands that we need to configure. Set interfaces G0/1 unit 0 family, it's inet, then address, it will be 10.10.10.3, mask is 31. Then I will set routing options, router ID, this one will be 3.3.3, and then I will go ahead and configure OSPF. So set protocols, OSPF, area 1, interface G0/0/1. Show pipe compare to check the configuration. So you have the necessary configurations, and then I will commit and quit. So on R1 we can run show OSPF neighbor. You can see that we now have 2 OSPF neighbor adjacencies, one on G00 in area 0 and one on G001 that is pointing to 4.4. So you can see that the router IDs are correct now as per what we have configured. The priorities set to default, the timers, the date timer and the hello timer, they are set to default. The state is full. Remember, OSPF has different states, so this one confirms that it's fully established. On R2, show OSPF neighbor. You can see that we also have 2 neighbor adjacencies, 1 to 1.1.1, which is to router 1 in area 0, and then 3.3.3, which is area 1. I can show OSPF interface detail. See that we have the DR and the BDR elected. So this one means by default, when you configure an OSPF without specifying the interface type, then by default it will be a broadcast. So we are electing the DR and the BDR. You can see the priority. You can see the hello timer, which is 10, date timer 40, return mission, And then authentication type, we haven't configured any authentication, and many other details that you can find when you use the detail command. You can also use the extensive, and you will get much more detail. So this is on R2. R3, we can also check the status, show OSPF neighbor. We only have one OSPF adjacency, R3 only connecting to router 2. So you see the router ID set to 2.2.2.2. Priority is still the default 128. Show OSPF interface. You see that we have G001. On R4, we do the same, show OSPF neighbor. You see that we only have one neighbor, show OSPF interface detail, only one interface. You can show route protocol OSPF. So when you run the show route protocol OSPF, you can see that we have these routes and they are coming via OSPF. You can see that the AD is set to 10. The administrative distance for OSPF on Juniper routers is 10. Metric, we haven't configured any metric. This one will demonstrate in our next episodes. So the metric is just calculated using the reference bandwidth. Remember, these are gigabit interfaces, so the metric is set to 1. So am I able to ping, for example, from R4, am I able to ping the interface on R3? So if I ping 10.10.10.3, you can see that we are able to ping. So we have learned the routes via OSPF. On R1, we can also verify show route protocol OSPF. See that we have the routes. Let me see, show route protocol OSPF. So we are only getting 10.10.10.2/31. Where is .2 R1? So this is connected, so we only have one network that is coming in via OSPF, so that is correct. On R2, we also expect the same, show route protocol OSPF. So you see that we have this, and then we have the multicast address for OSPF. So if I try to ping from R2, I should be able to ping 10.10.10.5. This is on R4. So you see that our adjacency has established. We have exchanged the route, show OSPF database. You see that we have the different types of LSS, router LSA, network summary LSA for different areas. On R1, we also expect the same, show OSPF DB. We have different LSS in our database. R4, show OSPF. We also have the router and network and summary LSS propagated across different areas. So from the commands, just to show you again the command that we have used, I remember I said that we are only using 3 commands to configure OSPF. So if I run show configuration, just show configuration display set. And these are the 3 lines that we have used. First, you need to configure the interface with an IP address, and then you need to configure the router ID, which is always a best practice. And once you've configured the router ID, you go ahead and configure the OSPF area and activate it on the interface. So this is it. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and if you have watched this video and you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more upcoming videos. So in our next episode, we'll be demonstrating how to configure the interface types and even how to configure the metric on the interfaces. So thank you again for watching, and see you in our next episode. Bye.